Alright, this presentation is for Chapter 22, Section 1, pages 518 to 522. We've been looking in the previous chapters how America is expanding its territory, moving across the states towards the west. This is known as manifest destiny. It's the right to expand from the Atlantic to Pacific. Many Americans felt that it was our God-given destiny that we should become a nation from sea to shining sea. And that's what's been happening as we've been seeing the expansion all across the country. So we were concerned or involved in what was happening in the United States. We weren't showing a lot of interest in what was happening in foreign countries. But what was going on there was a lot of imperialism, and imperialism means extending your power to build large empires, and you do that usually through conquest or through colonization. So European nations were developing all these colonies in different places throughout the world, and now the United States is going to kind of turn their attention towards that, and we're going to become a colonial power as well. So the question is, why did America join the imperialist club at the end of the 1800s? What's in it for us? So we're going to look at some of the reasons why. First, commercial and business interests. Businesses want to expand their marketplace, and the way to do that is to export their goods to foreign countries so they can make more money off of it. So that would be a reason why. Next, we have the closing of the American frontiers. We've said we've spent the last several decades expanding across the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast, and now all the land is kind of taken up. That was one of the problems in the late 1800s when all the immigrants were coming to the United States. There really wasn't any land available to them to become farmers. That's why they ended up in the cities, and we saw all the problems that came about because of that. But the country has now been pretty much settled for the most part. So there's kind of nowhere else to go as far as America is. There were also religious and missionary interests. There were a lot of people who thought that it was, again, America's duty to spread the word of God to other nations in the world and to convert them to Christianity. So you had a lot of missionaries going out into the world. And then lastly, military and strategic interests. Alfred Mahan was an admiral in the U.S. Navy, and he wrote a book called The Influence of Sea Power on History, basically explaining why it would be important to have a strong Navy, and he convinced Congress and the American people the importance of having a strong Navy in becoming an imperialistic country. So we're going to expand our Navy primarily in the Pacific. And we'll take a look at this map again kind of at the end of this, but it shows basically a lot of the places where the United States is going to kind of take over. Alright, the first place we kind of set our sights on is Japan. And the reason being, Japan for centuries had closed its borders to any kind of foreign trade. All they allowed was a fleet of Dutch ships to come in once a year to do some trade. No other countries were allowed in, and Japan had isolated themselves from everyone else in the world. Well, the United States now wanted to change that. So what they did was Commodore Matthew Perry of the U.S. Navy took a fleet of American warships and sailed over to Japan and basically showed up on the doorstep of the Japanese emperor and basically said, "We're here to open up trade relations with you." And the emperor kind of looks out into the bay and sees this fleet of American warships, and he's obviously intimidated, and Japan had no way to defend themselves against that. So America pretty much forced Japan to open up its doors to trade with America. So we have kind of our first conquest there in Japan. Next, we're setting our sights on Alaska. And what happened with Alaska is basically Russia offered to sell it to us. and we took them up on their offer. William Seward, who was the Secretary of State, was the one that was behind this, and he's the one that convinced Congress and the President to approve this. Alaska was bought for $7.2 million. A lot of people thought Alaska was just this kind of barren wasteland, cold, frozen, of no use or value. So this purchase was known as Seward's Folly, folly being like a joke, a mistake that he made. That's William Seward there, on your left, sitting in the chair. And that's him at a meeting convincing Congress members and so on that Alaska would be a good buy. This was also known as Seward's Icebox. So again, he was ridiculed for the waste of money Americans saw. Why would you spend that much money on this kind of barren wasteland? But he got the last laugh when eventually gold and silver and oil especially were all discovered in Alaska, and the country has made billions of dollars off of the natural resources that Alaska has to offer. So 7.2 million turned out to be quite a bargain. And Alaska may be cold, but it was not a folly to purchase that area. Next, we're moving on to Hawaii. The first Americans to Hawaii were missionaries, and they were there in the early 1800s. The 1820s, you can see it, their first kind of chapel was built there, church was built there. So the first Americans, again, were the missionaries who went there. Within the next couple of decades, though, American businessmen had kind of set their sights on Hawaii and started to buy up large pieces of land there, and were running plantations there, businesses. One of the largest of these businessmen was Sanford Dole. If you've heard of Dole pineapples, that's where it came from. That's a picture there of him. And he kind of led the other American businessmen. They wanted to kind of take control of Hawaii. At this time, there was a new queen, Queen Liliuokalani, is the new ruler of Hawaii at this time, and she wanted to basically get rid of all the Americans and let Hawaii be for Hawaiians was her slogan. But Sanford Dole basically backed an uprising against the Queen and called on the American Navy to step in and help out as well. So some troops of Marines came, and basically we took over control of Hawaii, we being the United States, and kind of moved the Queen out of her palace. There's again a picture there of her. You can see where the Hawaiian Islands are located, kind of in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. Again, she wanted the Hawaiian Islands to be back under the control of the Hawaiian people rather than the American businessmen, but she was unsuccessful in that, and she was deposed and removed from her position, and then Hawaii was annexed, which basically meant that the United States took over control of the country. Here's a picture from the ceremony. If you look kind of in the center of the black and white picture, there's Sanford Dole. He's being made the provisional governor of Hawaii, and now Hawaii has been annexed, and it will eventually become our 50th state. Now we're moving on to China. And basically, what was happening in China, if you look at the map, different European countries had all kind of moved into parts of China and created what were called spheres of influence. So they were in control of that piece of land, the trade, the goods, everything that came from that area, and everybody kind of stuck to their little piece of the pie and didn't bother everybody else. Well, if you look at all the countries involved, the United States was not one of them, and now we wanted our own kind of a slice of the pie, basically. So Secretary John Hay sent a letter to the Chinese government basically saying we want to get rid of these spheres of influence, and then everybody be able to be kind of on equal footing with China and everybody trade. That would, get our foot in the door, and it would make sure that no one country had more control than another. If you look at the map again, Britain had the largest territory as far as these spheres went, and we wanted to kind of neutralize all that and let everybody have an equal part of the trade business that was going on. Well, the Chinese people weren't too crazy about that. And what you had was called the Boxer Rebellion. And it was a group of Chinese people who rose up in rebellion and tried to chase all the foreigners out of the country. It lasted about 55 days. Peking was the capital city in China at the time, and that's where most of the fighting took place. You had over 230 foreigners were killed. They were called the Boxers because the Chinese people did a lot of the kind of martial arts moves, and the foreigners, the Europeans and the Americans, thought it looked like boxing moves. So these men were called Boxers when it wasn't, boxing like we know it. But anyway, the Chinese tried to get all the foreigners out of China, but they were overpowered and it was unsuccessful. And basically, China was forced into what was called the open door policy, where everyone is going to be let into China. And now, as you can see, America is now a Pacific power. You can see where the United States is, where Alaska is. All those little red dots are places where we've kind of taken control. And again, part of our reasoning for that is because we're doing trade with China and Japan now, we'll need places where our ships need to stop and refuel. So that was the reason for kind of taking control of all the little islands there in the central part of the Pacific. So America is now an imperialistic nation, and we'll see in the next sections what kind of trouble that's going to get us into.